Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to Thursdays with Friends. And this is an online conversation on very current issues. The topic of this week is environmental rollbacks and climate change. This program is brought to you by the Friends Committee on National Legislation, a national nonpartisan Quaker organization that lobbies Congress for peace, justice, and environmental stewardship. I'm the show's producer, Wesley Wolf-Bear Pinkham, and here's our chat host for Thursdays with Friends, FCNL General Secretary Diane Randall, and her guest, Alicia Cannon, who is FCNL's Environment and Energy Lobbyist.
Sorry about that delay. Thank you, Wesley, and welcome everyone to Thursdays with Friends. I'm thrilled to be with you today and to have Alicia join us today, and I'm going to introduce her in just a minute. So any of you who have been on this before know that I keep changing my environment. I am now in FCNL's green building on Capitol Hill. Our facilities team has been doing great work to try to help us safely come back to work for those of us who are able to. Many staff continue to work from home, but it's great to be back in here. So we're still kind of centering my camera and everything. I hope this all goes smoothly. Before we get started, I just need to note that 2 days ago was the end of our fiscal year, and we had a matching challenge to try to raise over $140,000. And I am thrilled to tell you that we met that challenge and more. And I need to thank everybody who joined us on this call, because I know that many of you helped make that happen. So thank you, thank you, thank you. That's hugely important to us. So this afternoon, we're going to talk about our Sustainable Energy and Environment Program. And specifically, we're going to talk about environmental rollbacks, and we're going to talk about what's happening in Congress, and a little bit about COVID-19 and the relationship to climate change. It has been a tough 3 years for environmental regulations in this administration. And I'm going to ask Alicia to tell us a little bit about some of the work that FCNL's done on those, as well as what the discussion is in Congress. Sometimes I feel like we have a lot of bad news to share about the environmental policy world, but the exciting thing is we actually have some good news to share today too. And we also have some work that we can share about what we do with young adults. And so we're going to get to all of that. We also are going to take questions in this half-hour program. If you have questions, I ask that you put them in the chat, and both Wesley and Stephen, I think, are going to help me channel those so that Leash can respond to them. And then finally, you're going to be seeing some links up on your screen to the FCNL website that are opportunities for taking action or for a little bit more information. So you can jot those down, and you can also always visit our website to see more information. So joining me this afternoon is our environment and energy lobbyist, Alicia Cannon, known also as Leash. You'll hear me say that. Before joining FCNL last summer, she interned for Representative Ellen Lowenthal, who is in the 47th District of California. While she was there, she researched various ways ports affect the environment. She is a graduate magna cum laude from Villanova University. Her degree is in political science and minors in theology and Irish studies. Recently, I'm really proud to say that Leash and I published an op-ed in Religion News Service that she drafted mostly, and I worked on a little bit, but we will put that up in the screen so you can see it too, that we were trying to look at the 5-year anniversary of Laudato Si, the Pope's encyclical on climate, which was really powerful document, and looking at that in relation to our Quaker perspective on climate change. So let's get to it, Leash. Welcome, and tell us the good news first.
Yeah, I have good news. So this week, the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis finally released their long-awaited report. If you're on our call, the Conscience on Climate Disruption calls, that happens, I think, every third Thursday of the month, you've heard me saying we're waiting for this report for about 4 months now. So now I can say we have it. So it's called Solving the Climate Crisis, the Congressional Action Plan for a Clean Energy Economy and a Healthy and Just America. So This report is massive. It's over 500 pages long, and it's essentially a blueprint for Congress to address climate change while advancing economic and environmental justice for all. And so the report was put together through consultations and hearings held nationwide to examine the tools, policies, local actions, and other solutions to reduce our country's greenhouse gas emissions. And FCNL, as part of an interfaith working group, was actually part of this open call for comments. And so we submitted our thoughts on carbon pricing, among other things. So it's really exciting that it's out.
And FCNL has been talking to lawmakers, especially trying to build bipartisan support for putting a price on carbon. Can you say a little bit more about what is in this report and talk a little bit about the politics of it as well? Because this was a bipartisan select committee, but the report itself is a majority opinion, correct?
Correct, yeah. So first, I'll talk about the carbon pricing aspect of it. So I was really excited to see that there was a section on carbon pricing. The report actually details carbon pricing principles that mirror our own carbon pricing principles and our interfaith working group's carbon pricing principles. And these principles are supposed to guide legislators as they craft a carbon price. It's also just exciting that they think a carbon price should be part of a broad suite of policies to fully address climate change. And one thing to note, which we always say when we talk about carbon pricing, is that the report says that carbon pricing is not a silver bullet and that there have to be other complementary policies in place to fully decarbonize our economy and address environmental justice concerns. So I think that section was well written, and I'm really excited to work on it later on. Regarding like the politics of it, it is a bipartisan select committee, and the report is majority only. There are some things that are bipartisan within the bill. However, I don't want to downgrade this moment because some of the recommendations have already been used in Congress. So some of you on this call might know that the House passed a behemoth of an infrastructure bill yesterday. And the infrastructure bill took into account the recommendations of the select committee before the report was officially released. So we know that House Democrats are already prioritizing some of these recommendations.
Thank you, Alicia, and that's really helpful. A select committee, for those who may not be aware, is that select committees are empowered to do research and to do reports, but they aren't empowered to propose legislation. And yet they do provide a blueprint, as Alicia said, in ways that we think are going to set up not only for what may happen in 2020, but more importantly, probably what will happen in 2021 after the elections. And so you're going to hear this from FCNL again and again, but we are getting ready for the elections, and we hope you are too, by knowing when you're going to vote, where you're going to vote, and by beginning to think about the kinds of questions you want to ask candidates. So just to put that little plug in there. Alicia, obviously this last month has been a time of dramatic uprisings around racial injustice. And while the focus of that has been significantly on police brutality, and friends have tuned in before to our discussions about that, there's a racial justice perspective to environmental work in a very profound way. And it's something that we've certainly tracked and paid attention to. But tell us a little bit about, specifically in this report from the Select Committee, did they pay attention to the issues of environmental justice as they've come up?
Oh, yes, definitely. They even have their own section that is entitled, backing up. The report has 12 pillars, and they have one pillar totally dedicated to environmental justice. And this is on top of the fact that environmental justice is woven throughout the other pillars that doesn't have environmental justice in the title. So they really took that into account. The pillar is called Invest in Disproportionately Exposed Communities to Cut Pollution and Advance Environmental Justice. So in Pillar 6, there are many policy outcomes, but the ones I want to focus on is one that I think is really important, is increasing the capacity of environmental justice communities to participate in the policymaking process. You cannot create equitable and just policies without the right voices influencing the policies. And I think we all should work towards that. I think people who look like me should work like that, but I also think we need allies who also just reinforce all of the voices saying that we need equitable and just policies. So that is one way. The other way I want to mention is that in the opening section, they mention the death of George Floyd. and how that is interconnected within the climate crisis, and how this is all one movement, and that we cannot have climate justice without racial justice. So I think the report used the extra time wisely to integrate all of the things that are happening in this moment and not ignoring a hard conversation.
It sounds pretty inspiring, actually. I will tell you that yesterday when we were talking about this call, I asked Alicia if she'd read it yet, the report, the 500-page report that came out the day before, and she acknowledged that she was still on the 19-page executive summary. But I just encourage folks to take a look at it for yourselves, too. You'll be hearing a lot more from us about it in the weeks and months ahead, but thank you for that, Alicia. I mean, one of the things, I've also been involved in some conversations recently where people who have worked long on climate change, as FCNL has, and with FCNL, in fact, talk about we are now in a kind of trifecta of we have a pandemic, we have renewed and essential attention to racial injustice, and we have the ongoing climate crisis that we know we have to address. Each of these are critical for us to address. So I want to turn now and just talk a little bit about COVID-19, because the pandemic has changed all of our lives. And just to get your perspective on the relationship between how you're seeing COVID-19 and the climate crisis in relationship. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so COVID-19 serves as a reminder that a danger to anyone in the world can be a danger to everyone. And when we ignore the severity of these global issues because they have not affected us yet, they can come to overwhelm the inadequate systems we have in place. And so COVID-19 is one of those dangers, and the climate crisis is also one of those dangers. One thing I noticed is that there was an undermining of the science behind COVID-19. President Trump even called COVID-19 a hoax, which seems like such a long time ago, but that was only a few months ago. Climate deniers use the same tactic. They say that climate exacerbated events are 1 in 1,000 year floods or just a really bad hurricane. That's not true. The biggest connection that we saw was that the populations that suffer the most from climate change are disproportionately affected by COVID-19. So I'll provide like an example. We know that people of color are disproportionately subjected to air pollution, and that increases their risks of cardiovascular disease and respiratory disease. And we know that underlying conditions like these decrease the body's ability to fight COVID-19. And then these same communities are the ones who have either lost their job due to the economic downturn, or are now suddenly deemed essential workers and have to work without proper protection. And then these same communities live in medically underserved areas and do not have easy access to the medical staff that they need in case they contract COVID-19 or other issues linked to air pollution. So it's all interconnected. And the one lesson I would like to leave on COVID-19 is that COVID-19 proved that Congress will legislate in a second when they know it's a global issue, when they deem it a global issue. And Congress, unfortunately, for Congress, it took overwhelmed hospitals and stay-at-home orders for them to pass these stimulus packages. Now, I do not want Congress to wait until thousands are killed by air pollution or millions are displaced from sea level rise for Congress to pass something on climate change. We need to legislate before catastrophic consequences and not after.
That's right. And let me just pause to say that if you have a question, I think there have been some questions coming up in the chat, but if you have questions that you want to put in the chat, please do so, and we're going to take those in just a couple of minutes. I want to go back and talk about kind of the role, the role between movements, and you identify the movement for addressing climate and the movement for addressing racial justice as linked and allied. And both of those have brought tens of thousands of people to the streets and hundreds of thousands of people to the streets and globally. How do you see the relationship of what's happening as people protest with what has to happen in the halls of Congress? And talk a little bit about your work at FCNL in relation.
Yeah, all of these movements have been driven by young people. Young people are the drivers of social change, and I literally just got chills talking about it because it's my favorite thing. I think all people should be as empowered and as informed as this generation. I'm lucky that I'm a part of it. So I first saw this in the beginning of my time at FCNL when we had the historic climate strikes in September. We had Greta Thunberg fiercely admonishing world leaders about climate change at 16, 17. And thousands, millions of people took to the streets. And you see the same thing now of young people refusing to let the Black Lives Matter movement just fall apart and go outside of our what public opinion can handle for so long. It's incredible. We just, as advocates, we need to read and pay attention to what these young people want to get done. These movements put pressure on Congress. These movements force us to become better people and to do better than we thought we could do. At FCNL, I get to talk to young people all the time and give lobby trainings. It's so exciting. It energizes me. I empower people to tell their stories to Congress and not be afraid of these world leaders or staffers, because they're just like you and me, and sometimes they know less than us. But it's really exciting. And then for Spring Lobby Weekend, we had 500 young adults, students, and Quakers from 38 states lobby on carbon pricing virtually. And it was insane success. When we first had to switch it to virtual, I think we wanted like 100 people to show up and maybe 30 lobby visits. And then we ended up having over 130 lobby visits. And it's all because of the tenacity of young people.
It was incredible. It was truly incredible. And I know for a fact that it wasn't what you expected. And I mean, you all had been working for months to make that Spring Lobby Weekend come about. And when we had to pivot and make it virtual, we just weren't sure. And it really was a tremendous success. And I think both a testament to, the commitment that people have to address this issue, but also, I just give kudos to you. And that was when Emily was here, but to Jim and Larissa and our whole team of people who work so hard on making that happen. So thank you for doing that. And I want to just highlight a little bit your lobby training, because this has been consistently, really year over year, we've had a number of school groups who wanted to come and lobby in Washington, have come up, visited the Quaker Welcome Center, and had you or someone do a little bit of lobby training with them. And they, as young as like 10, 11, well, maybe not 10, but 12, 13, 14 years old, have gone over and talked to their members of Congress. Can you share a specific response that a lawmaker gave to these young people coming forward to advocate for action on climate?
Oh, yeah. My favorite story ever. In November, we had a school from Virginia come in, and we're going to have them lobby their member of Congress to join the Climate Solutions Caucus. So Emily and I did the training. Everyone was empowered. We had great stories. And we were ready to lobby the member. We're going to lobby the specific member, not a staffer. And it was really exciting. The kids were excited. However, the member got stuck in votes. So the staffer came out, and we told the kids, like, this is still matters, you got this. And they did the lobby training, and we recorded it so we could send it to the member of Congress later. And the kids had also handwritten letters for the member of Congress expressing why they were scared about climate change. And so the staffer promised to give the letter to the members. And we left the day kind of defeated. Also, a side note, we were doing this outside on the steps of the Capitol. And during this time, Greta Thunberg walked by, and I was losing my mind. So back to the story. So the kids were a little defeated, but excited that they could do it anyway. And then a few weeks later, the member of Congress had their scheduler call and say, I want to talk to the kids at the school. And so the member of Congress offered to do an in-district visit. And it was so exciting. And it happened. Emily and I drove down to Virginia, and usually the member of Congress stays for like 5 minutes, gives their speech about climate change, and then they walk away. But this member of Congress spent 30 minutes with the kids answering every single one of their questions, and at the end helping them study for their Revolutionary War test. It was the best. It was it was a 3-hour drive. It was so worth it. I was so empowered. So when people tell me that their voice doesn't matter, or one, they don't know enough, or they're too young, these kids were 13. And they got their member of Congress to visit them at their school. So
it's such a great story. And it also just proves how inspiring young people can be, that if you, members of Congress actually are interested in hearing what young people are saying to them. Alicia, let's go back to the virtual lobbying and what people can do, because we've had a question already. What should we be doing? And FCNL always has something to offer for people to do. And so today is no exception. We have an action on our website, and we also have opportunities for people to get training on virtual lobbying. I mean, we have an action people can take just by emailing, but we also have ways that people can actually set up their own visits with Congress. But what's the message we're giving to Congress right now? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we talked about the good things, which we have had great good things this week, but there are still bad things going on in Congress that we need to stop. So many of you know, the Trump administration has done insane regulatory rollback in the last 3 years. In addition to allowing polluting industries to waive environmental reviews, there's going to be another congressional stimulus package, and we need to ensure that there is not a fossil fuel bailout in the next stimulus package. So we know that members of Congress have been vying to get a fossil fuel bailout, and this effort has been thwarted 3 times already, but we need to do it one more time because there's going to be another package. So part of the reason that we don't want a fossil fuel bailout is, one, they've already gotten money through a different avenue that's still not fair and should be going to small business owners. Number 2, polluting industries primarily reside next to communities of color and low-income communities. And lastly, if we give more money to the fossil fuel industry, we're just delaying the inevitable delay to a clean energy economy. So my favorite phrase that I say is, like, we should not be funding a public health hazard during a public health crisis.
That's good. That's a good line.
Thank you.
And just status right now, the House passed a bill earlier this month, or actually in June, I'm sorry, called the Heroes Act, which we liked a lot of what was in it. Did that include the fossil fuel bailout, or did it did
No.
not? Okay.
No, there has not been a fossil fuel bailout yet.
Okay, so the next step is we're waiting for the Senate to take action. And our understanding is that after this recess, they're leaving today for their July 4th recess. They'll be back, and in the month of July, we'll be debating a new COVID-19 relief package. And in 2 weeks, Thursdays with Friends is going to feature the elements of that COVID-19 relief package that we want. And we're being talking about, SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. We'll be talking about unemployment insurance. We'll be talking about the long-term economic impacts. But now, in preparation for that, we can urge Congress what we don't want in the package, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We know the oil industry is trying.
So I want to also keep inviting questions, but we said we were going to talk about environmental rollbacks, and that really has been just a disappointment. I mean, I know people on this call, I feel, you feel like, you wake up in a day, read the paper, and it's like, oh my God, it's another one. It's something else that they've like taken off, Talk about a couple of these, and what is the impact of these rollbacks, and what can we do about it?
Yes, definitely. I don't think the average American understands the importance of environmental rules and regulations. So the biggest one recently, President Trump signed an executive order that undermines the landmark National Environmental Policy Act, commonly known as NEPA. So NEPA is a safeguard that forbids the government and polluting industries from starting projects that pollute our environment, harm our health, and exacerbate climate change. So this executive order is just waiving the environmental review that is required by NEPA. And that has so many devastating effects. It would also speed up the public comment period or even take it out altogether. And a lot of communities of color rely, and advocacy groups rely on this public comment period and environmental review process to thwart projects that are terrible for the environment, terrible for public health. And President Trump's administration had already attacked NEPA this January by doing proposed changes. So, and I can't express how fundamental NEPA is to environmental law. And so it's really terrible that they did this. And also the timing was not, they did it under the guise of a pandemic, saying it's going to help the economy. It's not. And on top of that, just in his administration alone, the Trump administration has rolled back, reversed, or modified 100 environmental rules or regulations. And this has implications for decades. It's going to take a long time to get these back to where they are.
So I just want to note that Elaine Emmy, who's a friend, actually served as a friend in Washington with us here from Indiana, said her father actually helped write NEPA and worked passionately to protect it many years ago. So thank you, Elaine, for sharing that. we're close to our end here, and I guess I would want to ask. I want to go back to this work that FCNL's done for many years in talking to Republicans, and tell me a little bit about what's the status of Republican support for a price on carbon right now. Where are we seeing that? And we, as I said at the beginning, we don't expect to see a price on carbon bill move in the next 6 months, but something could happen in the next session of Congress. But tell us where sort of the support is, where the opportunity is.
I think there's definitely an opportunity to cultivate more Republican support, especially with a mechanism that generates money for the economy. We have spent a lot of money trying to recover from COVID-19, and carbon pricing generates revenue, and you can tailor that revenue use to what you need. Of course, we wanted to protect and uplift all the frontline communities, and we can do that and some. So I think that was a good way to talk to Republicans in Congress. I also think that at some point we're going to have to come to a compromise on what climate change legislation will look like, and carbon pricing is right in the middle and is the perfect compromising ground. And plus it's efficient and it works. So I think we're setting ourselves up for a great 2021. We just have to continue advocating and bringing up all the positives and about carbon pricing. Yeah.
And I think it's still up. I know that some of the work that you've done this year with Emily was to take a look at the various carbon pricing bills that have been introduced in the House. And again, even though those bills aren't going to move forward, they are the foundation for probably what will move forward in the future. They are at least, when we get to the point of crafting something that might move forward, they'll probably be drawing from these bills. And those follow a set of principles that FCNL has developed, which I think is really important to look at. So I encourage people to go to that site on the FCNL website to learn a little bit more about carbon pricing. At least we're out of time. It goes by fast. Thank you so much for being a guest today on this Thursdays with Friends. But I just want to offer if you want to have any closing remarks before we come to a closure.
Yeah, I think I just want to emphasize the fact that we are running out of time to meaningfully address climate change. And while we have multiple crises at the moment, just because we're not thinking of climate change doesn't mean it's not progressing and getting worse. So we need Congress to be able to multitask and engage each crisis simultaneously, also because they're just so interconnected. And lastly, I just want to make sure that everyone knows these environmental regulations were enacted with a purpose. And using the pandemic as a cover to roll them back is just so terrible and putting the health and well-being of all Americans at risk. So I think I didn't answer this question, but what you can do is you need to educate your friends. A lot of people do not know about this and don't know how important it is and how long this is going to take to reverse. Yes. Also, no fossil fuel bailout.
Yeah, most immediately, no fossil fuel bailout. Longer term, educate yourself, educate your colleagues, educate if you're part of a religious community, Quaker or otherwise, educate your faith community. We work in a lot of coalitions, and I know that the faith community has been very active on addressing environmental concerns and climate change in particular. We work with a lot of other organizations like Citizens for Climate Lobby that we might have some people on this call who are active there. And it will take all of us. I mean, that is how change comes. It comes from people in the streets, which we talked about before. It certainly will come from young people who are going to fuel the energy and the demand for this and have, I would say, some of the purest motives for what they're doing. So we hope that you'll be involved in every way and that the people on this call will continue to take action with FCNL. Visit our virtual lobbying center. We have actions on many of the issues we work on. You can do more than one. We encourage that. And just again, thank you for your financial support. It is so important, encouraging for us to be able to continue this work. It is an uncertain time. The economic crisis is going to affect all of us, and we want to ensure that the people who are on the margins are protected, and that includes people who are poor, but it also includes people that are in communities that have been disproportionately affected, particularly people of color. And so we will continue to persist in this work in environmental justice, the work for a solution to climate change, or at least a temperance of climate change, both within the United States, and to promote global support for addressing climate change. Thank you, Leash, for joining me on this call. We really thank you for all the work you're doing at FCNL, and thank you to all of you who joined us. And stay tuned in 2 weeks. We have a number of other opportunities for events. Do visit our homepage of our website to learn more about those. And I hope you all have a great 4th of July weekend.